Today is June 5th, 2016, and this is episode 162 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you? How was California?
It was great. NASA did a cool event, and we saw or experienced 5 different sonic booms and learned a whole lot about how they're trying to make sonic booms quieter so we can fly supersonic over populated areas, and got to bum around Edwards Air Force Base, which was awesome, and I could go on for weeks, and I'll shut up now. It was a great trip, and I'm sorry I missed last week recording a show with you, but it was well worth missing.
So did Maverick buzz the tower?
I signed a non-disclosure about that. So
okay.
It's kind of like, I would be telling you, no, he did not, if he actually hadn't, but I cannot say yes. So that is my warranty canary, that I'm not saying he didn't.
Uh-huh. Okay.
No? You don't? Okay. Fine.
Whatever. It's
Whatever.
Very complicated.
Yes.
All right. Well, so before we get into the stories tonight, I will remind you that the thoughts and opinions we express on this show are ours and do not represent those of our employers, either past, present, or future. So, before we get into the stories, one thing I wanted to mention, and I tweeted this out, I've been reading this really interesting book. It's called Infrastructure as Code, and I know that most of the DevOps cloud people will be saying, well, it's about damn time. But I'll tell you what, it's really interesting. And
now, is this sort of like software-defined networking kind of?
Yes. Well,
okay.
Right. The software-defined networking would be the network side, but there's a whole similar construct on the server side. And, the more I read it, it seems, to open up some really dramatic capabilities from the perspective of, just fundamental IT operations, but also security things. And then at the same time, I think it opens up vast new exposures that we never really had before.
Well, I saw you tweeting about that earlier, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about a lot of organizations I've been in, and how traditionally security is so often a bolt-on or an afterthought or an audit activity over IT. And I think for that to be successful from a security standpoint, we have got to get a closer relationship and a mutually respectful and good working relationship between our RT groups and our security groups for, to start building in security at the beginning, which is a very cliched thing. But when you don't and you try to retrofit later, it's going to get worse and worse and worse as we go further down this path that you're talking about. And I don't know how we're going to do it, because I see so much animosity and tension in terms of priorities and workload being pulled in different directions between the security guys and your typical IT guys. And it seems to be getting worse for most of the folks I talk to out there, not better, except for some, organizations.
Yeah, certainly see that in spades. I do think, though, that as I have been reading through this, and certainly a lot of this stuff is very intuitive once you start kind of going through it. The thing that strikes me is that I think there is a fundamental change afoot in the in the IT industry, and at some point things have to change, right? I mean, I certainly we'll continue on. Some organizations will continue on for a while, but I think at some point we're going to cross the threshold where things are dramatically going to change, because IT, in the traditional sense and the way that it's been done, is it's just going to be too burdensome. And so I think the interesting opportunity is that now, like you said, we have this opportunity to kind of go hand in hand with IT and try to build things in a more secure manner. And I think it's particularly important because, as I mentioned, this new, I hate this word, paradigm.
Oh boy.
I know. Um,
Are you
it,
saying it's a shifting paradigm?
yes, has lots of synergies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it, it has some just fundamental exposures that we really haven't had. We just haven't had that kind of problem before, or these kinds of issues before. And so I think we not only have to help mitigate those, but also I think we have an opportunity as we embrace these new concepts to just make things fundamentally better. So, um, more to come there.
Yeah, it's definitely intriguing, and I don't mean to be a naysayer. I just see this cultural barrier to getting this right from a security standpoint,
Oh
and
yeah,
I think it's as much on security as it is on IT to make this shift to keep up with this new way of doing things.
no question, no
And
question.
we're seen as the people who say no, and often for good reason. But like anything, the business is going to do what the business is going to do, and we've got to find a way to stay relevant. And often that comes down to leadership decision making. But nonetheless, we can also cause self-inflicted wounds if we're not careful.
Got that right. So anyway, as I continue going through the book, which hasn't actually been released yet. I have access to the pre-release book through the Safari Books online portal, and it's really, I mean, it's not complete yet, but what I've read so far is really great, and I encourage people to read it. I don't have any association with the author in any way, but I'm finding it fascinating. So
So that's the O'Reilly Safari book
yeah,
portal,
yep, safaribooksonline.com.
which you have said many good things about, and I just
I
today
love it.
just got access, so
I love
I'm
it.
gonna check it out
I love it.
because I don't already have about 18 books stacked up on my bookshelf to read, but that's okay.
It's quite expensive, but it's really good. So anyway, let's get into our stories. The
Oh
first
boy.
of which, I know, here we go. The first of which comes from ThreatPost, and the title is "TeamViewer Denies Hack Blames Password Reuse for Compromises." And there was a couple of different stories over the past 2 weeks where maybe the attribution was misplaced. So we had Dropbox was accused of having been hacked and all of their passwords disclosed, and it turns out that apparently that the problem there was password reuse from Tumblr, or not entirely sure. And then this particular case here is that there were some users who reported having been hacked, with attackers clearing out their PayPal accounts and ordering crap on Amazon and whatever, clearing out their bank accounts and whatnot through TeamViewer. And TeamViewer, by the way, I have kind of a love-hate relationship because many of the major breaches I've ever worked on have had TeamViewer play some aspect of it, and whether that's um, the Windows help desk scam, trying to trick you into installing, the victim to installing TeamViewer and letting the attacker access your PC, or somebody sets up a TeamViewer based thing as a convenience and uses a weak password. But anyway, in this particular case, there was an allegation, at least, that TeamViewer may have been breached, and attackers were accessing TeamViewer accounts, but all indications seem to be that this is actually just more password reuse.
It seems a confusing and much complicated situation. There are a lot of TeamViewer folks coming out of the woodwork saying, or customers coming out of the woodwork saying, "Hey, I had this happen. It started here. Something is clearly going on." But TeamViewer is emphatically denying that they had any sort of breach.
Yeah.
And everybody else at the brothers having password breaches right now. It's the in vogue thing to do. So
Well,
you
in
know what?
MySpace, MySpace found a way to be relevant again by being breached. So yes,
I You gotta love the PR firm who came up with that idea.
uh, you know, look, we're talking about MySpace. It worked, right?
Well,
They got their
you're
money's worth.
you're talking about MySpace. I was trying not
You
to.
just said it too.
I had to because
Hmm.
Anywho, what I'm wondering, and I have nothing to back this up, just pure conjecture, is I wonder if somebody somewhere on one of the underground forums wrote up some sort of attack script, uh, going after all the various creds that have been dumped, sort of an attack pattern against TeamViewer customers. And there's some sort of somewhat focused activity based on this underground plan to, hey, here's an easy way to go access this other stuff if you've got all these other passwords. In other words, a way to leverage some of these password dumps going on. I don't know. It's weird that we have this big spike in TeamViewer unauthorized activity, and it makes me wonder if some origin of it is coming from somewhere, or if this is just an organic thing that has just happened. If indeed TeamViewer hasn't actually been systematically breached.
Yeah, exactly. We don't really know what's going on, but it certainly, if it is a password reuse problem, it certainly smacks of the issue that Apple had with iCloud a couple of years ago, where they
Right.
were effectively letting unlimited retries. So the attackers were basically banging their dump of email addresses and passwords against the authentication servers and getting lucky.
Well,
And
not lucky, but
well, yeah, whatever.
lucky.
Lucky.
Right.
Right.
Well, the other thing I would say about, you're mentioning earlier about TeamViewer, you've got a love-hate relationship that it's been involved in a number of breaches you've been involved with. I would just say, don't blame the tool, blame the victim. Wait, no, that's not. You know
Well,
what I mean?
yeah. I guess the point I wanted to make there is that from an enterprise perspective or a company perspective, we really want to make sure employees are not subscribing their workstations to a TeamViewer, because given the chance, it'll happen.
Well, some organizations use it as part of their, productivity. I mean, I've seen it used extensively in various organizations as a way their teams work with each other. So maybe it's
Uh,
a matter of making sure that you secure it and use it properly.
oh
I mean,
man.
at this point, I would be very, very skeptical of it, and I would say you may want to block it for a little while. But at the same time, that could disrupt methodologies that your teams already have in place. So I don't know. I mean, it's this is that difficult balance of if you've got a tool that's being used by your organization, you can't just outright block it without providing them some other methodology to achieve the same goal of whatever they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you just leave RDP right out open to the internet. I mean,
Well, of course. I
yeah.
mean, who doesn't?
I don't know. I just have this vision of TeamViewer, at least in the context of a company, it like playing with matches in a barn full of dry hay. I mean, it might be fine, but damn it, when it goes up, it's gonna be bad.
You had a rough childhood in the 1800s, didn't you?
I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I
That's
did.
true.
Absolutely. So anyway, yeah, moving on to our next story, and this is a follow-up, and the title is Chubb Scores Victory in Key Cyber Ruling, and this one is on the businessinsurance.com website. So the story here is that PF Chang's, which we covered in the past, had been breached back in 2014, had 60,000 some odd credit card numbers stolen, and they were basically charged back by a couple of different banks, including Bank of America. And so Bank of America sent them a bill for 1.7 million bucks, and they paid it. PF Chang's paid it, and then they sent another bill for 1.9 million dollars, and PF Chang's paid that. Well, PF Chang's filed a claim against their cyber insurance policy through a subsidiary of Chubb Limited, and Chubb denied it. So P.F. Chang's took this subsidiary named Federal to court and basically said, hey, they're not living up to the obligation of the insurance policy. And interestingly, the judge found in favor of Bank of America, actually I should say in favor of the insurance company, saying that Bank of America, who was the injured, quote, injured party, deriving the loss, which was ultimately being paid out by the insurance company, actually didn't suffer the kind of injury that was covered by the insurance policy in the first place. And so it's an interesting problem, because then you can say, at least to me, the question is, well, what good is the policy?
Well, that's a very good point. And I think this is something that we've been kind of kicking around for a while now, is this cyber insurance market. Is how useful is it truly going to be? If the whole concept is that businesses can shift liability off of themselves to their cyber insurer, but the cyber insurers aren't going to pay out, how useful is that? And I think this is the beginning of that, figuring out all the boundaries and the case law that's going to go around this. Now, I'll be honest, this is a complicated case, and it seems like there may be some nuance here that is only applicable to this particular situation, and this may not truly, start to cast out over the entire industry. And I guess I'm not a lawyer. I'm not even close to a lawyer. And the way that the article was written was a bit confusing as well, but it appeared to be that the judge in the case said, look, P.F. Chang's wasn't injured from a privacy standpoint, which is apparently the section of the insurance that they were trying to get paid out on. Is that how you read it?
So they had the statement or the clause in the insurance policy basically said that there were a couple of different things that would be covered, and one of them was a privacy injury. And so that was the thing that P.F. Chang's was claiming. And so actually the P.F. Chang's itself wasn't injured, right? And at least with respect to...
Well, they were monetarily injured.
Right, but not from the perspective of the this insurance policy. So the issue is that P.F. Chang's paid a bunch of money to Bank of America, and then P.F. Chang's turned around to their insurance carrier and said, hey, we just sent a $1.9 million check to Bank of America. We'd like that covered under our policy, please. And the insurance carrier said basically, no, Bank of America didn't suffer a qualifying injury, right? Bank of America itself did not suffer what's called a privacy injury. Now, I'm not entirely sure what defines a privacy injury. I can certainly think about in my mind, but
we know it's not this, according to that
it's
judge.
not this. That's right.
So this policy didn't cover having to pay Bank of America the 1.7 and 1.9 million. So they didn't get paid, which, wow. Obviously it's a very mature market when businesses look at other types of insurance. They understand the clauses and they understand the market around fire insurance and business continuity insurance and liability insurance, all that jazz. And I think this is going to start to shake out businesses trying to understand cyber liability insurance. As this is one of these painful lessons, I think we're going to have to learn of what is covered and what isn't, why, and how you ask for your policy to be constructed and what clauses are in there and all that good stuff that makes lawyers a lot of money.
Well, I think that's right. And it kind of points to, I assume that P.F. Chang's had their legal team involved in the construction of the review of the policy. And kind of like on the IT side, we often fall victim to a lack of creativity in envisioning what can go wrong on our networks. I suspect we have a similar kind of problem here where we have a lack of creativity on the part of the people procuring these policies, because I assume that this seemed like a really logical way to bound things to P.F. Chang's when they signed up for the policy. But in the end, it didn't cover what they ended up suffering. And And so I think that's, this just may be a case where we have, the legal, the legal profession, I guess, has to get up to speed on the different kinds of things that can happen. Because, if you go to your lawyer and say, hey, here's this policy, does that look good? Of course, the first thing they're going to say is, well, it depends. But once you get past
Right.
once you get past that, then I think that that they have to have some ability to, I assume, I don't know exactly how everybody uses their lawyers, but to say, well, here's the kinds of things that this is going to cover, not going to cover. Is that okay with you? And I don't think that happened here.
And I think the takeaway for me is that this cyber liability insurance or cybersecurity insurance is not an easy button.
Yes.
We're gonna have to be a lot more thoughtful and mindful around this, and we're at the beginning of that industry.
Yep.
The way I see it.
That's right. All right, so moving on to our next story, and this one comes from CSO Online, and the title is "Will Your Backups Protect You Against Ransomware?" And the thing, I mean, it's hopefully pretty obvious that backups are what you need to do to help stave off the losses. And, it's obviously not going to save you from ransomware, but it'll save you from the losses related to ransomware.
Backups done properly.
Yes. However, that's not the thing that interested me most.
Oh, wow. What interested you most?
I'm going to read it verbatim. Quote, still, according to the FBI, more than $209 million in ransomware payments have been paid in the United States in the first 3 months of 2016, up from just $25 million for all of 2015. Holy cow.
Yeah, and that's stuff that people admitted to the FBI. How much does this happen and nobody says anything to any of the authorities to track it?
So yeah, that's some good funding for the people developing this stuff, by the way. I assume that they're going to reinvest some of their cash into the ecosystem.
You think?
So, wow. But basically, the article kind of points out that you really do need to have a good backup strategy in place that you test periodically. And not all backup systems are going to be resilient against ransomware, because ransomware, well, for instance, if you have a USB drive plugged into your laptop and that's how you run your backups, and you get ransomware, you get your CryptoLocker on, it's going to CryptoLocker your backup drive too, which really points to the whole version, probably cloud-based backup type thing, which, by the way,
yes,
works really well if you're in in a Western country. It doesn't work so well if you're in in a market or in a country that has crappy bandwidth or really expensive bandwidth. There was an interesting, just completely aside but similar problem. There was a story about how I don't remember exactly what the customer was, but they had a satellite internet connection. And one of their systems, one of their Windows 7 laptops, did the forced Windows 10 update over satellite.
Oh,
Yeah.
I gotta say, I'm not a Windows 10 hater, but the heavy-handed tactics of Microsoft is causing some unintentional pain with that kind of stuff. I mean, how difficult is it to check to see what kind of bandwidth they have before it downloads a big patch? And I don't mean type, I mean throughput, for instance. Or we're moving away from people having full control over their own desktops, and that's bad. It has upsides, forced patching and security, but we're moving away from people being able to control what's really happening with their own machines.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, it's we hated what happened with Windows XP going end of life, and
no, I know this is a foreseen consequence. How many times have we said, man, these dumb people shouldn't be allowed on the internet. They should just be forced to patch. Now we're getting what we bitched about, and we being a broad term. So,
yep,
yeah.
Careful what you wish for.
Indeed.
So the next story we have is a little bit related, and it also comes from CSO Online, and the title is 93% of phishing emails are now ransomware. And the title there kind of says it all. It was a study done by FishMe, so put that in your pipe and smoke it. But they basically say that it was up 56%. It was up from 56% in December, and that was up from 10% the previous year. So they're like, I don't know if they have honeypots or what their methodology is, but they saw 6.3 million emails, a 789% increase over the last quarter of 2015. And by the way, that kind of matches everything I've seen, both personally and professionally. This is a dramatically expanding enterprise.
Yeah, I would agree. It makes too much sense for them not to go after this market the way they are. And yeah, of course, when we're getting this from a vendor, we do have to take it with a grain of salt. But this, I completely agree with what you said. This jives with my own anecdotal evidence, which of course is completely accurate at all times, that this is where the market is pivoting. And I really do feel we see this train coming. We can do things to stop it before it starts completely eviscerating our corporations. I don't think we're doing a good job of getting ahead of this train, but it is coming. This is one where we see it coming. We saw that it went after consumers first. It's pivoting at corporations. We see it coming. Now we just got to get our leadership on board with taking the appropriate steps to mitigate this risk, and or we are going to really regret it. This one's going to be ugly, and I don't see this going away anytime soon. This is such an easy monetization of security issues. It makes so much sense for the bad guys to go down this path.
Yeah, and I fear that we have yet to really see the full fury of what is to come here. I mean, think about. I know somebody on Twitter was talking about this. What about a worm? A ransomware worm. Versus when's the last time we saw a worm, right? I mean that's kind of old school, but now, this kind of makes that concept make sense again.
Well, I was reading the other day about they were doing some research around a piece of ransomware that's self-propagating and spreads laterally like quote unquote a worm.
Yeah.
In an organization, an enterprise. So it's coming. It's going to get ugly, and I think we're going to get to a point where it's what if I can crypto lock, or ransomware your BIOS? So even if you had good backups.
Yep.
What if I can start getting into your GPU? What if there are growing possibilities that are actually going to get down to almost hardware level locks if we're not careful.
That's right. It's coming, and I don't. It's again. I think we're artificially constrained by our lack of imagination on what is yet to come here.
And I think the other tough thing is that when I talk about this, some folks, well, how do I stop ransomware? And the problem is you're talking about stopping the entire exploit landscape. Right? Yeah. It's the entire concept of malware that you really have to stop.
Right. You're asking, how do I stop malware?
Right. Which is, if that were that easy, we wouldn't have most of the industry we have. So it's more a matter of how can you mitigate the risk and limit the damage.
Yeah. Yep.
And of course there are things you can do to limit the spread of malware, certainly. But that really is, and again, keep in mind that the exploit vector is independent of the payload. So any sort of exploit vector could be used, and then ransomware could be the payload, or the downloader that drops could go get it. So it's there is no one easy blinky box that magically fixes this problem.
Oh, come on. There's got to be a blinky box.
You're right. You know what? I'll work on that.
Or some guard llamas.
Absolutely. You know what? We need guard llamas, and then we need to have the red team ocelots go after the guard llamas and see how they do.
Heck yeah. That's right. All right, moving on to our next story, and this one comes from VentureBeat.com, and the title is Federal Reserve Bank was hacked more than 50 times between 2011 and 2015.
This is the clickbait portion of our show.
Yes, it is. So, and by the way, it's more or less totally devoid of any actual information, except that the Federal Reserve apparently was hacked 50 times.
I have seen some other articles that attempt to have more details, but it is again very, very rough. My initial thought is, okay, what does it mean by hacked? What is their criteria for a security incident? Not all hacks are equal. I mean, did they get a piece of malware? Did somebody try to do a brute force guess on a password? What does this mean?
I'm assuming, just based on the amalgamation of different things I've read, it appears that the 50 were some sort of successful intrusion. But, again, it's kind of undefined. And the whole point here is that there's a U.S. congressional committee who has subpoenaed, or I don't know if they've actually issued a subpoena or if they've just asked nicely for additional information. So apparently all of this came to light in response to a Freedom of Information Act request, and it was some ungodly large number of pages of data in response, which apparently was really heavily redacted, but I guess there was still enough information in there to determine, what happened, or 50, the number 50. So, but this particular the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology is trying to get more information, including in an unredacted copy of the report. So maybe more to come. I am going to guess that this will be heavily shielded from public view for various reasons. So more to come. It will be interesting to see. It's always interesting when a public institution gets compromised, because sometimes, not always, but we get to see a lot of the gory details, which are interesting to analyze.
Indeed.
So
well, we'll see. The problem with this is that this gets very political very fast, and like I said earlier, how do you define a hack? And hopefully more detail will come out.
Indeed. So our next story comes from CSO Online. Oh my gosh, we sound like a CSO Online shill this week. The title is Up to a Dozen Banks Are Reportedly Investigating Potential SWIFT Breaches. Yes, you knew that we were going to go back to SWIFT, didn't you? So Mandiant or FireEye or ManEye or FireDient or I don't know. Fireman. There you go. I like that. They apparently were called in to investigate the Bangladesh breach, which we have talked about at length. And they apparently are also investigating compromises in up to 12 other banks, which, tells me that FireEye may have a problem with information leaking out about their ongoing investigations.
I have a whole rant I would like to talk to you about that, but I'll let you continue the story and I'll circle back around to that one.
Sure. Which, by the way, we don't actually know who leaked it. It was a source familiar with the investigation. So anyway, so again, we don't know any of the specific details other than that there is apparently a whole herd of other banks that are investigating potential breaches. Again, we don't know if these were actual breaches or attempts or whatnot, but it certainly seems like, given this report and some of the other news that's been circulating, and I think the head of SWIFT actually said this themselves. There's really no central reporting, right? There's no obligation to report breaches, and so there really isn't anyone who has a good aggregate view of the landscape to say, is it 10? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? How many breaches has there been? And maybe we're we're going to start to get some sense of how common this is.
Could be. There's also a possibility that Mandiant offers a breach detection service that you could hire in without even knowing there's a breach. Basically, they could show up on site and say, all right, look around for evidence of a breach. We don't know there's one, but double check us. So it's possible that some of these 12 banks are just taking in their mind, a due diligence step to say, all right, let's do a compromise detection activity with Mandiant. But at the same time, I'm incredibly disappointed and frustrated that the concept of that the information that FireEye is talking to 12 other banks has been released. That can only come from FireEye. I mean, who else would know that?
Yeah, I was trying to be kind.
I really want to say shame on FireEye. You know, when I hire a security consultancy or a security vendor, I expect them to maintain some level of privacy. And this, I think, is completely unethical and inappropriate.
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, this is a bit of a pattern of behavior we're seeing now from Mandiant and FireEye. And they are struggling right now with their stock price and their earnings. And in my mind, the only thing this does in their eyes is benefit their sales activity by saying, look how awesome we are. All these banks are coming to us. You should come to us too. So I can almost promise you this came out of their sales organization. I really doubt the consultants or the people doing the investigations would ever stand for this level of unethical behavior.
Wow. Yep.
Probably
so.
I'll probably never be hired by FireEye now, and I'm okay with that. I just, I've seen it too often. I worked in sales in the security industry for 10 years, and sales guys cannot help themselves from blabbing about their other customers to other customers. They don't understand the concept of a non-disclosure agreement. They're oblivious in general. This is a generalized statement to maintaining their confidentiality of their customers. They don't even think about it. So it has to be a culture of the organization to continually remind their sales teams, shut the hell up about who else you're working with. And don't be cutesy about it and say, oh, I can't say I'm working with Coke, but I'm working with a major, soda vendor based in Atlanta. You just said the same damn thing. And I've seen that shit over and over again where the sales guys are out being cutesy and like, oh, look, I'm telling you my secrets. No, you're not ingratiating yourself to another customer. You're displaying your own lack of ethics and integrity.
Yeah, and I think in this particular industry, again, we don't know exactly where the leak came from, but it is really concerning. Because when you hire a company like that, you're expecting them to exercise a lot of discretion. So,
especially when it may, what if these 12 banks hire these guys, like I said earlier, just to come and do a double check?
Yeah, and that's very possible, by the way. I know that that is a very responsible thing to do. I think the downside to that is in every instance I've ever been aware of, when you hire someone to do something like that, they find something, right? And so because they found something, that doesn't mean that it was, right.
It doesn't mean that the Swift terminals are at risk,
right?
Potentially.
Right.
I'm not trying to downplay or make excuses. I'm just saying that there's a complete lack of context and understanding around this when you just sort of leak, oh, we're talking to 12 banks.
Yep. Anyway. Hopefully they will take that under advisement.
If it comes out that somehow this wasn't FireEye who leaked this, I'm happy to eat my words and go back on my statement. I'm having trouble imagining any other source who would know centrally that FireEye is talking to 12 additional banks. Maybe a regulator? Maybe
Swift. I don't know.
I'm trying to figure out who else would know that. So I guess, it is possible it isn't FireEye, but man, it sure feels like it.
Yeah. They're the only one that really seems like they would have a horse in the race to say that, right?
And we've seen some kind of shady stuff out of them before along these lines. So, again, I can't prove it. I don't know it for fact. But but I've seen this behavior out of other organizations and out of other sales teams. That maybe I just am a little bitter and biased about this, but it sure feels like something slimy sales guy maneuver here.
Yeah, and by the way, it all, very likely didn't happen with the assuming it did happen from a FireEye employee. I highly doubt it was sanctioned, right?
Yeah, you're probably right.
And
And
so
and and to be clear, I actually, I think they have good people. Like I know people over at Mandiant and FireEye, and I think they're a good company. I would not tell people not to hire Mandiant, but they can't be doing this.
yeah, well, I mean, they are kind of the preeminent
Yeah.
uh, company. I mean, they're hired to do this stuff for a reason. But I think you're probably right. It does smell like a sales kind of a thing. But anyway, again, I don't think that takes away from their competence in handling the
No, I bet
investigation.
I bet their
So
consultants are very frustrated by this sort of stuff.
I would think so.
Yeah.
So our last story for today comes from the Register, and the title is "Swift threatens to give insecure banks a slap if they don't shape up." And I've been as I've watched this story unfold, one thing that's occurred to me is that Swift, they've made it abundantly clear that they're just like the post office, and they're not responsible for the mail that people send to each other, and
Yet they're getting a black eye.
and that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So they're basically, they keep saying, it's not us. We're not getting hacked. It's these banks who are our customers. So it's got to be incredibly frustrating, assuming that this is in fact happening the way we think it is. But this is kind of in a way, it's a little bit difficult to have sympathy, right? Because okay, yes, you are the mail, right? You're the mail carrier, right? But you have some, you've got some moral obligation to recognize that um, things are happening in the landscape, and so they're taking the story here is that the Swift group is taking some action. They're going to apparently expand, whatever this means, its use of two-factor authentication, which makes a ton of sense given that apparently all of the attacks we've heard about so far have leveraged stolen credentials on Swift terminals. And they're also going to be mandating, quote, baseline security standards. I assume that will probably be as effective as PCI is at stopping credit card breaches. But
You're stealing all my thunder from my notes. But carry on.
sorry. So, but yeah, I think that was basically it.
I find it interesting that they use the word expand its use of two-factor authentication, which sort of insinuates that they already have some two-factor options that most people perhaps weren't using, is the way I read that sort of insinuation.
Yes.
But like you just mentioned, I'm very curious. Okay, so these new baseline standards, who's going to develop them? What are the guidelines? How will they be measured and enforced? Are they valid? Are they useful? Or is this going to just be more compliance overhead that banks are, going to do the minimum necessary to avoid problems? And when you're dealing with a population as broad as they have of 11,000 banks using Swift, you're obviously going to have a huge variation in the sophistication and capabilities of security teams around all that. So that could be a huge pain in the neck to somehow mandate. And I don't know. I mean, if you look at PCI and you look at the dual mandate of the credit card agencies, it would hurt their own business if they too heavily enforced PCI and kicked people out of being able to process credit cards. So they typically, in my experience, rely more on fines and kind of slaps on the wrist than truly kicking them out of, you know, pulling their rights or their ability to process credit cards. So I wonder if it'd be something like this too. I'm sure Swift makes probably their money off of these transactions. So they're in this tough spot of having to promote use of their network while also securing their network, and to say, they're going to, uh, threaten to give these insecure banks, you know, kicking them off the network. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, it does say that they will suspend the banks who have weak
Yeah.
cyber defenses. And the thing that strikes me, and I know I went on a crazy rant a couple weeks ago. I don't think these, the Swift presence in a given bank. Now, certainly, I don't have anything to go on except what's been in the news recently related to this. But it doesn't seem like this is some huge sprawling thing that's deeply entrenched in many systems. It sounds like, in general, it's contained to a few dedicated systems at each of the banks. And from that perspective, it's kind of frustrating that we're having apparently such a hard time protecting systems that should be, on an isolated network in a locked room. I just don't.
I guess, but think about how inefficient that would be if you're a large organization and you're triggering money transfers all day long, all the time. I mean, wouldn't you want API calls into that system out of your main banking application?
But see, that's the thing. I don't know that it has that capability.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it does, but
well, I think we're ignorant of it a little. But
yeah.
you got to think that there's that pressure on the back end of Swift too, to say, hey, I can't hire a banker to just go manually enter these all day. I'm doing 20,000 a day, or whatever. I would think that there would be pressure to optimize and automate those sorts of transfers.
Maybe so.
I don't know. I don't. I really don't know enough about the Swift, organization and how they function. The other thing is that it seems to be that most of this activity is all in Southeast Asia. So, and it seems to be that the bad guys who are systematically going after this, if it is indeed one set of bad guys, seem to be centered there and seem to know the Southeast Asia version of this best. So,
yeah, and there was a reference. I think it was in this story of regarding some malware. Maybe it was in the other story regarding some malware that was found on I think it was the Taiwan or the Philippines bank. And when they analyzed the malware, it actually had hard-coded credentials included of, I think, 10 or 12 different banks, and including, like you said, most of them were in Southeast Asia, but I think they had one in New Zealand, one in the Philippines, and then one in Europe and one in the U.S. But we don't know. There was really no indication if I guess I would assume that each of those institutions has been notified that there's malware running around with their information hard coded in some malware. But and maybe just maybe they're the ones who have hired Mandiant to come in and find out if things are going around in their network. So
perhaps.
Anyway, I think we killed it. We killed Swift for this week.
I think so. We swiftly killed Swift.
Yeah. So anyway, that is the show for this week. Sorry for being week behind, but hey, life happens. And thank you again for listening. Thanks to all of our Patreon donors. You can find all of the links to the stories we talked about tonight on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callan on Twitter at Lurg. Definitely would not recommend following me on Twitter, which is at MaliciousLink, in case you're curious. And, if you have any...
Is that some sort of weird reverse psychology play you just did there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wait till I start up the boycott of the Defensive Security Podcast. We're gonna go through the roof.
How would you? Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah. We're gonna hire protesters to picket outside of libraries or something. I don't know yet. Llama farms.
Oh,
Hey, hey,
man.
hey,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah. The
hey, ho,
allegations.
ho! Defensive security's got to go.
Yeah, the allegations that we mistreat llamas will be coming out soon.
Yeah, that's right.
Llamas were harmed in the making of this podcast. Is that what you're anticipating?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, thank you again, and with that, we'll talk again next week.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks as always for listening. We'll see you on the Twitter.
Bye-bye. Here we go. Today is June 5th, 2015. And wow, let me try that again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.